Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft, welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. You catch me Monday through Friday on AM 560, Chicago's Morning Answer with Amy Jacobson and myself, 5 to 9 a.m. And my guest host for Illinois Rising this week is Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project. And Pat, interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal the other day about a study conducted by a couple of academics. One is Mitchell Hoffman. He's a professor at the University of Toronto. Finds that the higher salary you confer on state legislators, the more time they spend fundraising as opposed to other perhaps more productive activities like representing the interests of their constituents, a particularly salient issue given the high compensation of Illinois state legislators.
Yeah, there's a perverse incentive there, Dan. You think that the more they get paid, the better job they would do. But really, it's different when you're a state legislator because when you get paid more money, you're incentivized to want to hold on to that job. And the way to hold on to that job isn't necessarily to do a good job. It's to make sure that you have enough money in your coffers, that you're connected to the right people so you can get reelected.
Well, let's talk to one of the authors of the study in question. He is Mitchell Hoffman. He's a professor at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, also a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Professor Hoffman, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So it's an interesting study that you co-authored. What was the impetus to look at legislator pay as compared to legislator effectiveness, and how do you kind of measure the latter?
That's a very interesting question. We had started this project several years ago, and we were motivated in economics. There actually is a small but growing literature on how the level of salary for legislators relates to different aspects of their quality and performance. And most of these studies have been done for other countries. There are a couple of really nice studies, one in Brazil, one in Italy, a couple from the European Union. And these studies generally try to find a positive relation between salary and different aspects of quality. For example, the number of people who run for office, the qualifications of the legislators, whether they show up for roll call bills. And we had started doing similar analysis for the United States, and we actually have a working paper that deals with some of those issues. But we became really interested when we came across these surveys that a couple of political scientists had run that included information about time use, and that's how we got started with our work on compensation and time use. And
so, give us the relationship between compensation and time use, or the distribution of time legislators spend on various activities based on salary or correlated to salary.
What we find is that higher salary is associated with legislators spending more time on fundraising, particularly on fundraising for themselves as opposed to for their party. But higher salary is also associated with legislators spending less time on legislative activities, which we define to include things like developing new bills, learning about existing bills, building coalitions within one's party, building coalitions across parties.
Professor, I'm wondering, my theory on this is that the lower that a legislator is paid, the better that they do, because the person isn't there for the money, right? They're there because they care about the job. They're there because they care about making a difference. They care about public service, representing their community. And that's why the pay isn't their incentive, right? Doing the job is the incentive. Serving their constituency is their incentive. Is there anything in the literature and the data that has any corresponding relationship to this? Is there any way to tell that, or is it just simply looking at the numbers and following the trends?
I think that's a quite interesting suggestion. The way that economists think about the issue you just raised is they would use the term selection versus incentives. What you're talking about there would be a selection story that salary affects the type of people that go into politics. And then there's also work on incentives, conditional on the type of person who's going into politics. How does salary affect the way they behave? And in our research, we actually can't cleanly distinguish the two of them. We think of most of our conclusions as being most related to incentives, but there is some work. What the Italian paper has a nice way of distinguishing the incentives versus selection. But I think for the United States, that definitely could be relevant. In our paper, we have some results which we think are mostly about incentives, but that definitely could be part of what's going on. Is you get people who are independently wealthy and they don't need to, do the job for the money.
Or if you just have people that look at it as it's conceived to be a part-time job, and so whether you're independently wealthy or not, you could be working another job, and then you go to serve once every couple of years. Like, for example, in Texas, where you get a $7,000 stipend to be a state legislator, you meet once every 2 years, and you look at Texas's economic performance compared to, say, Illinois, where we have the fifth highest paid lawmakers in the country, kind of a professional political class, and we haven't passed a balanced budget in 15 years. And you start to get back to some of the conclusions you have drawn, which are sort of intuitive, I suppose. The idea that, boy, if it's a good gig, I'm going to be more inclined to spend a lot of time to protect my good gig if I'm making a good salary, if I've got good benefits, as opposed to the idea of it's a $7,000 stipend, I'm happy to serve, but I got to focus on what really puts bread on my table, and it's not being a state legislator.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. Yeah, for sure.
And so just in thinking about the conclusions from your piece, what are some of the next questions to explore or the questions that are raised that deserve further exploration here as we try and set up compensation systems that advance the interests of the constituents in these states, not so much the interests of politicians always?
For sure. I think so. You could think of next steps as next steps involving time use as well as just next steps in general. So I don't even think on the question of time use that our paper is the last word. It's more of kind of a first look at what we think is a really interesting question. But one thing that is a limitation of our study is that it was self-reported. The politicians were asked in a confidential survey in the mail to rate how much time they spent on different activities from a 1 to 5 scale. And we think it would be amazing if there was a way to use what some people have done in other contexts where they actually have someone keep a time diary or have a personal assistant keep a time diary to see whether our results hold up to kind of finer measures of time use. But we think in general also that, that trying to think more holistically about other types of outcomes. And what we take away from our study right now is that salary could have an unintended consequence or an unforeseen consequence of, as you said earlier, causing people to appreciate the gig and maybe spend more time on fundraising than they would if they had a lower salary. But that doesn't imply by itself that higher salary is bad, and it might have benefits in terms of other things like the quality of the people that go into it, or how hard they work once they're there, whether they show up for roll call bills, things like that.
All right. He is Mitchell Hoffman. He is a professor at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and a very interesting paper he co-authored on legislator pay and performance. Not the last word, but an important first word. Professor Hoffman, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And, the interesting thing about this, Pat, a little bit different than Illinois. in Illinois. He talks about higher salary, you spend more time fundraising. If you're a Democrat, and frankly, a lot of Republicans in this state, you don't have to spend that much time fundraising because you're just an indentured servant to leadership. And so when it comes time for an election, if you're not in a safe seat, you just wait for the money to be airdropped from House Speaker Mike Madigan. And again, to a certain extent, that applies on the Republican side, too. And so you don't have to spend more time fundraising necessarily. You just have to be willing to be a kept person.
Yeah, it makes you wonder then if they're not legislating because they're not raising money. What are they doing, right, under our circumstances in Illinois, right? They're not spending their time fundraising, and that's why they can't do their job. Why can't they do their job? Mostly because I think they don't care to do their job. They just care to keep their job.
Right. We don't have 177 legislators, despite that's the number in the House and the Senate combined. We really have 4 legislative leaders and maybe 15 to 20 independent thinkers. And the rest are just waiting to be told what to do and waiting for their campaign cash from leadership.
Yeah, and that's got to change. And I wonder, given this study, if the electorate would respond to a piece of legislation that said, we're going to pay the legislators way, way less, because studies show that, you'll get better people, more dedicated people. Not unlike Catholic schools, Dan, where you get people who perform as teachers for much less money than their public school counterparts. And maybe that would be something the public would get behind.
I think the public get behind it. I'm not sure the General Assembly would.